Welcome back. Let's do the precepts, and for you the book is over to your right. Can you see if this shows
Yes.
me in there, so people will not see half me and will get half the message?
Let's see. Can I move this?
Yeah. I'm not sure if it will sit. Yeah, try something like that. Maybe it's heavy.
Yeah. Just no. You know what? Do you have a pencil or something?
This?
No, I think
This
that
help?
might roll. It's if you get something smaller that'll sit in this.
Okay.
Okay.
We should do something.
Oh, here. Oh, no. Yeah, maybe that'll work. Thanks. I'm not sure if that'll. No, I guess not.
Maybe if you put it on a flat surface.
Is it good now?
Yeah, it is. If it
Perfect.
stays just like that.
Yeah. Let's hope an earthquake won't occur in the next 1 hour. Okay. Do you want to try this in Pali today?
Sure.
Yeah. This is page 3. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang saranang gacchami, Dhammang saranang gacchami, Sanghang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi Sanghang saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi Sanghang saranang gacchami. Panati pata veramani sikkhapadang Adinnadana veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Kamesu micchāchāra veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Musavada veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Surameraya majjapama dattana veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Right. Sadhu. So I got the intro in Sinhala here. Is it okay?
It's all right. It's not great, but you're in there.
We are discussing, I'm not sure if you knew, I think I gave heads up to you the other day, the middle length discourses 148, that's almost at the end. can, don't worry, it's
Right.
you will get it. It's about how the the view of I dissolves, or identification um, can be removed just by thinking this way or understanding this way. This discourse is so special that the first time this was delivered, 60 monks became enlightened, became arahants, completely eradicated their defilements. We are going to discuss a shorter version of it, but you can guess what the extended sutra will be like. And in this introduction, we find that this was um, also the main discourse taught by this monk named Maliyadeva in Sri Lanka. And he went to, the list goes to about 15 monasteries he visited, and in every place he visited, 60 monks became enlightened. So we may not encounter it today because we don't have 60 people here to be enlightened. That's what I always think about this. But this also can be chanted out loud, or at least that is what some people do in some places. And one of my friend Buddhist nuns, she memorized this. She's from here. She lives in Missouri in the Dhammasukha Meditation Center. Doctors told her that she has some short-term memory issues, and then her teacher told her to memorize this to convince her that she doesn't have any such problem. And she became a good student of that teacher, Bhante Vimalaransi, and she is teaching all around the world now. And her name is Sister Kema. I hope they will get in. So we will.
Do you want me to go check the door?
I think
no, he's
Bhante
not.
J is coming. Yeah. So this, so that monk is Maliyadeva. There is another monk named Chulanaga. He taught this, and about 1,000 monks became arahants, became enlightened. So here comes Vimal. Because I'm using the iPad for live streaming, I'm going to use the computer for the readings. You came perfectly on time.
Thank you very
Just
much.
about
I
to
was
start.
late. I was late anyway.
It's a rainy day. Did you see the creek? It's flooded.
Is it? There's a lot of rain.
This time
today.
you can bring a boat and this is called the 6 sets of 6. There are 6 of 6 sets. That's a different way to look at this. In Pali, this is called Chachakka Sutta. Chakka means a set with 6 things in it. Cha means number 6. So 6 of 6 sets. That's how you can understand the meaning of it. So this is also found in middle length discourses. And right here I did this in Sinhala about, I think, 2 years ago, and people loved it. We will see we will gain some insights from this. Some people tend to think that pleasant feeling leads to craving, and painful feeling leads to anger, aversion, and then they tend to think that neither painful nor pleasant feelings are okay because they are neither painful nor pleasant. But this sutra says there is a danger in identifying with neither painful nor how do neither painful nor nor pleasant feelings. And the reason behind that is that there is someone who is identifying neither painful nor pleasant feelings. Because of that identification, there is an underlying tendency for I creation, I manifestation in there. So we will find out all that in this discussion. Thus have I heard, on one occasion, the Blessed One was living at Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's park. So every time I see this part, thus have I heard, I always tend to think that this is the Buddhism we have now is Ananda's Buddhism, the attendant monk of the Buddha. He had elephant-like memory, so we believe that he memorized all the words of the Buddha exactly as the Buddha taught them. And then later things were added to these teachings, like different discourses came later. But here, this is found in every discourse, almost in every discourse. Thus have I heard, this is what he heard. If you were there, you will say, this is what I heard. So this is someone's version of it. We need to remember that all the time. This is not the Buddha directly, at least in this place. There, the Buddha addressed the monks, saying, monks, and the monks replied as, Venerable Sir, the Blessed One said this, monks, I shall teach you. I'm using monks here, you may find bhikkhus in there. Monks, I shall teach you the Dhamma, or doctrine, that is good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end, with the right meaning and phrasing. So this is how the Buddha instructed monks who travel in the world to teach as well. If you are a missionary monk, teach the teachings that is good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end, which means teach them morality. So that's the beginning. And teach them concentration, stillness, and teach them wisdom. So stillness is in the middle and wisdom is in the end. So you have a start, a middle, and an end. I shall reveal holy life that is utterly perfect and pure. Parisuddham Brahmacharyam Pakaseta. This is the Pali of it. Pure Brahmacharya, pure conduct of living as a Brahma, or living a holy life, living like a monk. That is, so now this teaching comes. So this is living holy life, if you understand this teaching, the 6 sets of 6. Listen and attend closely to what I shall say. Yes, Venerable Sir, the monks replied. The Blessed One said this. So I think the monks here were very close to become enlightened. They were reflecting on the teachings, and they were, of course, next to the Buddha. And we don't know whether the Buddha also instructed them in detail after giving this discourse for them to become enlightened, like push them to the other side, like you are still here, why don't you jump over, kind of a inspiration. But even for the 5 ascetics in Buddha's teachings in very early days, still they had to learn about non-identification for them to become enlightened. Without that, the Buddha's first sermon was not enough for them to reach that goal. So here comes the synopsis, the summary. The 6 internal bases should be understood. So that's one set, six internal bases. The six external bases should be understood. That's the second set. The six classes of consciousness should be understood. So they continue. That's another set. The six classes of contact should be understood. That's another set. The six classes of feeling should be understood. That's another set. The six classes of craving should be understood. So that's another set. Those are the six sets. And in number, there are six sets. Enumeration. So now we have the detailed exposition of it. So the six internal bases should be understood. So it was said. And with reference to what was this said? So this is the Buddha asking, like, why did I say this? Kind of a question. There are the I base. This is very evident for you from your understanding of teachings from welcome from other times from the retreat. What bases? The eye base, the ear base, the nose base, the tongue base, the body base, the mind base. So mind is clearly in there, in that set. Most scientists nowadays, professors, don't believe in an existence of a mind because it's invisible and you cannot measure it, and you cannot touch it. When I was a cognitive science student in Europe, I heard professor was teaching about just the five, excluding the mind, and at the end of the class I went to him and said, there is this mind too, and what do you think about it? And he said, well, you can't see it, you can touch it, you can measure it, so we still don't accept the mind as a thing to be taught. Then I said, well, the Buddha, like people, taught it. Then he said, yeah, the Buddha was a smart guy. That's what he said. So that was the end of the conversation. So it was with reference to this that it was said. The six internal bases should be understood. These are called ajjattika ayatana, internal bases. Very, very important in your understanding of teachings. Because in a different discourse, the Buddha says, understanding teachings is found within this very body. And you can see that it starts from the six, in this discourse, it starts from the six internal bases.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So when you say the eye base, are you talking about the organ of the eye?
Yes.
Okay.
The organ. Because we come to different, how do I say it, components of that experience
Right.
later in other sets, as you will find. Because right after this we are going to external bases.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also part of the eye, but now in the beginning we are talking about just the material, flesh eye. The six external bases should be understood. So it was said, now the Buddha is saying, with reference to what was this said? There are the form base, because you see forms from your eyes. Sound base. Sounds are also called forms in different discourses. They are also different, there are different sound forms. The odor base, all these are called forms, rupas, the term they use. Because they go as chakkurupa, sotarupa, like eye forms, ear forms, ghana rupa, nose forms, So you see the term forms is also used for those external bases. Anyway, it's clear for you as we go that the external bases are the ones that attract these internal bases. The form base, the sound base, the odor base, the flavor base, the tangible base, what you touch, and the mind object base. You can have the mind, but you need to have mind objects for it to become active. Elsewhere we find that when your eye is active, all the rest of the bases are inactive. They are not, well, you may think that they are all working at the same time, but when you are conscious on one thing, you are looking at something, all the rest is not really there. They like subdue, and they don't lead the way. It's very interesting to think these things. Now we are going to 6 classes of consciousness. So what are these 6 classes? And it continues, dependent on the eye and forms. You see the connection, dependent on the eye and forms, eye consciousness arises. And then dependent on the ear and sounds, ear consciousness arises. Dependent on the nose and odors, nose consciousness arises. Dependent on the tongue and flavors, tongue consciousness arises. Dependent on the body and tangibles, body consciousness arises. Dependent on the mind and mind objects, mind consciousness arises. Now you can see why someone can memorize this. This is like maths. When you find the flow, it stays. It gets stuck in your mind, in your head. So you don't need to know a lot of teachings. Just learning this is enough, and you can be a monk and just keep teaching this. No one will say anything because it includes.
If nobody has questions.
If somebody asks questions, you can say, look at yourself, the teaching is in you. Try to meditate, you'll be fine. Alright, so we now covered 3 sets. We are moving to the 4th set. The 6 classes of contact should be understood, so it was said. And with reference to what was this said? Let's see. Dependent on the eye and forms, eye consciousness arises. The meeting of the 3 is contact. So you have eye and forms, and eye consciousness arises. 3 together conditions contact. So I think immediately after when these 3 come together, contact happens. It's a momentary process. It's even hard to grasp. In your meditation, when you are very, very slow, I think you can capture these moments. This is why sometimes when people say, focus on the present moment, it's not a thing that the Buddha taught for the ordinary people. He taught about Paccuppanna-kala, the present. Stay in the present, be mindful in the present. I think he may have taught it that way because the moment you try to focus on the moment is gone. You cannot really easily capture it. It takes a couple of moments to capture the moment. Or when you are, I think, in neither perception nor non-perception, the 8th attainment, after passing the 4th jhana, you go to infinite space, infinite consciousness, nothingness, and neither perception nor non-perception. In that state, I believe you have also passed a deep level of equanimity. So there is so much balance, and you can observe how things arise and pass away in your mind. Then you can see these little things separately or clearly with your own insight. And until then, you may not understand the teachings, because this is just a memory. Someone else is teaching and you get it, but you haven't seen it. This is just knowledge. So let's continue. Now you can see how contact manifests. Dependent on the ear and sounds, ear consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. Dependent on the nose and odors, nose consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. So dependent on the tongue and flavors, tongue consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. Dependent on the body and tangibles, body consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. Dependent on the mind and mind objects, mind consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. So those are the 6 sets of contacts. Let's move forward to the 5th set. We have only 2 sets remaining. The 6 classes of feeling should be understood, so it was said. And with reference to what was this said? Let's try to make the connection here. Dependent on the eye and forms, eye consciousness arises. Clear? Okay. The meeting of the three is contact. We came to the 4th set. With contact as condition, there is feeling. What feelings?
Negative, pleasant, unpleasant, or neither.
Yeah, pleasant, unpleasant, or neither. Negative, positive, I think is in modern day dialogue we find those terms that wasn't there during the Buddha's time. Happiness, yes, and unpleasant feelings, yes. So that's how they termed those. The inner was used for something low, something negative. The words were there, but to frame feelings this way was something, I think it's something that came later in our time. So now, not looking at the book, can we do the next set? So dependent on ear and sounds, ear consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. Dependent on contact conditions,
On the feeling.
feeling arises.
Yeah.
Dependent on contact, feeling arises. So it seems easy, at least to make the relationship, to make the connection. Let's do the the mind, last one. Dependent on mind and mind objects, mind consciousness arises. Meeting of the three, contact.
Yeah.
Dependent on contact,
Feeling.
feelings arises. So mind objects, consciousness, contact, feelings. Came to the 5th set. And we are going to the 6th set. The 6 classes of craving should be understood. You can now guess, right, how the flow comes. Dependent on the eye and forms, eye consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. With contact as condition, there is feeling. With feeling as condition, there is craving. As soon as there is feeling, which means you like pleasant feelings, you dislike unpleasant feelings, that is because you have craving. You see, craving, in a different way to look at craving is liking and disliking things. You do that because there is a liker and a disliker in your... They're just coined 2 words. Someone who's liking, someone who's disliking, and someone who is identify and think kind of feelings, like neither painful nor pleasant feelings. It's interesting in a book by late Venerable Katukurunde Jnanananda, K. Jnanananda, he identifies Madhupindika Sutta, the honey bowl discourse that we discussed earlier, and in it he explains the subjective nature and the objective nature. And how he explains it, that is that you see I as an object, that's the objective nature. And until someone sees things, that's where the subject comes. He makes that connection. So let me clarify this. So you have I and forms, and these are still objects, and contents operate in these things, right? And Tinnan Sangati, so, and then there is feelings. Contact is translated as passa, passa pacha vedana. Dependent on contact, there is feelings. Yang vedeti, what one feels, one perceives. Tang sanjanati. Yang vedeti, tang sanjanati. What one feels, one perceives. That's right there, you see the word one has to be there in order to explain that experience. That's where the subject comes to be. So you can go back to the honey bowl discourse and see that connection. That's also a discourse very much praised by all Buddhists too. That's a discourse that helps their awakening. Also that eradicates the view of a self. Anyway, I didn't want to distract you too much with additional information. Let's yeah?
So, when, eye consciousness arises or whatever, is that consciousness, does that involve the mind?
Yeah.
Okay, so just want to make sure I'm understanding. So
this was a question I had myself for a long time, because mind is the sense base, and consciousness, like what are we talking about when we talk about consciousness here? Even in mind, as we just found, different things like hindrances occur. These are called mind objects. That includes mindfulness, that includes effort, and all these different energies are mind objects that are identified by being conscious on these things. You can have them and not label them, not identify them. So when it's interesting, when there's nothing else to be conscious on, right after neither perception nor non-perception, and that too is taken as a perception, and you do not fix your attention on it, so there's nothing to be conscious on.
So that feeling, when you come to feeling, whether you neither perception nor non-perception,
Yeah.
that then you have to have previous experience to justify that, isn't it?
Yes, that's why when you come out from that state, then only you can. Like neither perception nor non-perception is the eighth attainment. Neither painful nor pleasant feeling is the feeling part. So these two are different in the first place, and neither. So adukkama sukha is the Pali word. Sabbekut nae, dukkakut nae in Sinhala. And that's the feeling part. When you come to neva sanya na sanyayatana, that's neither pain, neither perception. Help me, please.
Non-pleasant.
Neither perception nor non-perception. when you come to that, the mind is very subtle. That's not a feeling part. But when you have, experienced that state, in discourses they say, you have to come out from that state and later analyze and identify where you were. And then come to the conclusion that, oh yeah, this sounded like this experience. And you can stay there forever. Kind of that's why when some people attain to these states during the Buddha's time, they thought that is the last step you can be at. But then the Buddha discovered that that's also a perception, and you can see its impermanence. So that's why he became unique among other teachers in his time, and no one else taught anything beyond that point afterwards in that stream of enlightenment process. So what I was telling you earlier is that when you have nothing else to be conscious on, your consciousness experiences nirodha. That's when you say consciousness ceases. It ceases. It doesn't. So that means mind or any other thing, all these things disappear. I'm sorry to confuse you.
And it never remanifests?
It does remanifest.
Oh.
And if you read, maybe that will be the discussion for the next Monday. If you read Majjhima Nikaya 43, you find what comes first when it remanifests. I don't want to give you the wrong details. It's
What's the name of that?
Chula. Not Chula Kammalbanga. Majjhima Nikaya 43, I can Google it.
You can have it later.
Don't know. Mahavedalla Sutra. So Chula Vedalla and Mahavedalla, these two these are taught by Venerable Kaccayana, who was really good at explaining teachings, expositions. But then the Buddha later approved these teachings. So we will discuss that next time. It's also there in Chula Vedalla. We find a discussion between a nun and a monk. They were a couple, former couple, Dhammadinna and Visakha. Visakha has attained the third attainment, anagami state, a non-returner state, and Dhammadinna has become an arahant by that point. And Visakha asks questions, and Dhammadinna answers. And Visakha later goes to the Buddha and reports the discussion, and the Buddha says, "Wow, she's such an enlightened nun." Or this is what she said was exactly how you should remember it. Said the Buddha to Visakha. So Mahavedalla Sutra is a little long. This is called greater sets of questions and answers, Vedalla, and Chula Vedalla is smaller sets of questions and answers. Let's keep that for another discussion. Interesting how many ways we can go with these discussions. So in this teaching, in Chachakka, in six sets of six teachings, we find demonstration of non-self this way in the next part. If anyone says the I is self, if anyone says this is I, this I is me, that is not tenable. Can you give me a different word for that? Tenable.
Tangible.
Sustainable. That's not like tangible. No. That's not true, kind of.
Not logical.
That's not logical. That's not so. Yeah. Um, why? The rise and fall of the I are discerned when you think about I became, so this thing came when you were born, and fall is when you die, this thing goes. So you cannot say that you arose and disappeared when you just look at the I. And since its rise and fall are discerned when you look at the arising and passing away of the I, it would follow myself rises and falls if you were to say that this is me. That is why it's not tenable for anyone to say the I is self. So that's why no one can say this is yourself. If you take just I alone, you pull it out, like you can pull this thing out. It will come, sometimes it comes out.
Don't repeat.
No, it doesn't break. It's, I mean, it drops, and sometimes I have to run miles to find the thing. So you pull this out, and then you cannot. You know the origin of it, and you know the disappearance of it. When you know this, you cannot say that it's you that originated and disappeared. So that's the simple logic. So this is amazing to think that way, right? Then it goes on to explain about every other thing. If anyone says forms are self, same thing. These forms, then someone has to say, when you look at the arising and falling, arising and passing away of forms, how do they arise and pass away? When you look at forms, they are there. They arise, then they become visible to you. And then when you pay attention to sounds, forms are no more in your center of attention. So forms arose and passed away in your experience. That's how we need to understand it. And if anyone says, I consciousness is self, I consciousness, it arises and passes away. Same thing. So you cannot say it's you that arose and passed away when you. These all when you take them separately. If you take them as a whole and then think that there's an I, that's what has happened to all of us, because we take this as a constituent, something, an entity that arises and passes away or continues somehow. And that's the problem that they are trying to untangle in this teaching. If anyone says, eye contact is self, that is, and then we have ditto marks here, dots, because the discourse, the translator doesn't want to repeat all this, but then he himself composed an extended version without ditto marks. You can find that online for people to read out loud. But then the question is how to maintain your attention, mindfulness when reading this. You may easily get lost. But then he says, read this slowly. If you make a mistake, go back and read it. It may take forever sometimes. Are you lost? Or are you there?
No.
You okay? Okay. Well, from this we will understand. If anyone says, so we were in forms and then we went to we were in I and then went to forms and then went to eye consciousness, eye contact, and then we are now in feelings, and then we can go to craving. If anyone says craving is self, then when you look at the rise and fall of craving, if there are birds over there, not rats. They like when something happens here, they just want to join. So if you see the arising and passing away of craving, when you see that, you will have to say that you arose and passed away when craving arose and passed away. Same with feelings. When feelings arose and passed away, you'll have to say, I arose and passed away. But the understanding of I in general is, I is this fixed permanent thing. So that's also challenged here. There is no such a permanent thing called I. So then it goes with ear, nose, ear sounds and all that set, and then nose and odors and that's it, and then it goes with tongue, flavors and that's it. Body, the mind, so that's how you don't find, or you can't logically, it's illogical for someone to label these things as I separately and say that, it's like you are taking a car and you separate the steering wheel and you say this is the car, when it's completely illogical to say it that way. So, and the Buddha's logic here is that you will see the origin, how the steering wheel came into being, and you see how it disappears one day, then it's decayed. So then you will have to say the car originated and car disappeared. So in that logic you cannot say it's a car or it's a permanent something or permanent identification of a car just for the steering wheel. So you are seeing these different pieces separately and putting your attention to find someone in that experience, when in reality you cannot find anyone. And you are like, how can I challenge this? How can I ask, think otherwise? Yeah, that happens to people when they listen to these teachings, because like in modern dialogue, people don't think this way. This is not how they understand things. Takes days to even grasp.
I think the question is how to think that way, because we are thinking we are behind the other side.
Yes, behind the other side.
Yeah.
How to get us to think this way is
Yeah.
hard. Moving on. Origination of identity. So, now monks, this is the way leading to the origination of identity. One regards the I, just the way we explained, that this is mine, this I am, this is myself. So these concepts are originated when you took each of these things as you. Same with forms, eye consciousness and eye contact, feelings, craving, and all these. Then you'll have to say this is mine, this I am, this is myself. So, having discussed that, you go to another subject, that is the cessation of identity. So how is the cessation comes? When one does not, okay, now monks, this is the way leading to the cessation of identity. See if your identity ceases with this understanding. One regards the I this way, that this is not mine. This I is not yours. And this I cannot be called I am. This I am not. I pressed the tab button. Let me go back.
Are you using the flesh eye and the eye as
Oh,
interchangeable?
sorry. Here we are at flesh eye.
Okay.
And then when we say my, mine, myself, I am, then you're talking about I, letter I. How come many people decided to come right at this time today and ring that doorbell?
Problem is the door is locked. That's the problem.
Yeah, we want to keep it locked too, because when something happens here, we don't really know what is happening out there. It's for our safety. Not that anything dangerous happens, but better safe
Then sorry.
than sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
Where were we? Cessation of identity, right? So we are talking about I here. Let's get back to that again. One regards the I, thus, this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. One regards all these things, that this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. So regarding all these little elements as not mine, not you, or not yourself, that's when insight arises. Like, yeah, if you think logically that way, you cannot label this as you, yourself, or you are being manifested with these different, when you have separated all this. Problem is, people take the whole thing as a cluster and then say, there is I. This is Rebecca, this is John, this is that person, this is this person, so all that. So the cessation happens when you regard I as this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. So the three as this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. That is how the cessation experience comes. I think when this was taught, monks were right there, seeing all these elements distinctly, separately, and they were able to see, yes, this is not me, this I'm not. So they were like jumping from one to another and right, like aligning with the teaching that the Buddha was giving. Now comes the underlying tendencies. We are coming to almost the end. It's 8:26. Can you wait about 10 more minutes? So, monks, dependent on the I and forms, I consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. With contact as condition, there arises a feeling felt as pleasant or painful, or neither painful nor pleasant. When one is touched by a pleasant feeling, what happens?
Residual craving.
Yes, one delights in it, welcomes it, and remains holding to it. Then the underlying tendency to lust lies within one. Can you go and ask them to lower the voice? And we will wait for him to come. So
Is lust only, like, it's not necessarily just sexual, it's like lusting,
karma, anything that you like, anything that you really,
coveting,
huh?
you're coveting.
Yeah, you want,
Yeah.
coveting, covetousness. Yes, that's exactly like, if any damage comes to anything that you label as yours, there's so much pain afterwards. Can be a silly thing for others, but for you it's so important. They say this is sentimental, and why did you damage it? Like I saw one time in Harvard, this office assistant lady, she had something brought from China, and someone really liked it. Inside it was a little palm leaf, something for her to become pregnant. She was missing, she didn't have babies. So the person dropped it, and a little piece of the case, the casket, the little, it was in a vase-like thing and broke. And she was still crying when I went, because I had a meeting with her right after that, because she wanted me to read that. she found it was written in Sinhalese script. I couldn't read it because they were only pieces. These are business things people do, like they put a little palm leaf thing and they sell it for money when you travel. So people think it has a special value. And she was crying and crying. For me, I didn't make that connection, so it wasn't mine, and I didn't feel it that way. So now you saw the set of verbs here. When one is touched by pleasant feeling, one delights in it, then welcomes it, then remains hold into it. Then the underlying tendency to lust lies within one. So these are anusayas, underlying tendencies. Very important. Sometimes you may feel like you are an enlightened person, but then you have to be really alert about underlying tendencies. So there was a monk who thought he was enlightened. This is Ajahn Braham actually. And he went on alms round. People served food in the monastery. I think the lady brought pudding, something that's very rare, and the head monk took all of that. and then he was like, in his mind he was complaining, like, people don't know, I'm the only enlightened monk here, and they can make huge amount of merit if they just offered a bit of that pudding for me. Oh, wait a minute, how can I think this way if I'm the enlightened monk? That insight came to him immediately after. This is how your mind plays tricks. Everyone has a time like that. You think, oh, now my defilements are eradicated. I'm the enlightened monk or the being now. Or my duty is done. This happens to many monks, but then soon they find defilements. Even in some Buddhist countries, including in Sri Lanka, they give certificates for different levels. Like you are a sotapanna, you are a stream winner, you have gone against the stream. So this lady one time went to a retreat, and this monk gave him gave her a certificate saying she is an anagami, a non-returner. And a couple of years later, she went to the same retreat, and he gave a lower state as a stream winner. And this lady got angry, saying, how come you give me a lower state? Earlier you said I am a non-returner, now you're saying I'm a stream winner. So just her getting angry and him giving those states, confusing her with those states, shows that you can't really label people that way. You get fooled easily, and you shouldn't even believe if someone says you are an enlightened. That happened to me. I was meditating in Kadavata one time. This person came and he said, oh, the teacher in your center is an anagami, a non-returner, and all he has to do is to go to a retreat in a certain place, and you should all go with him. And I have been in touch with this man, he says, this monk, in letters for a long time. So this monk also was curious about the man who was writing to him, because the monk was giving good talks, and I think he apparently heard these talks.
Was
So
the monk chief monk?
I shouldn't mention that.
Okay.
Or the name of the man. The story is like he managed to convince the monk to go to this place, remote, and we all went with the monk because we were excited about enlightenment at that time. So I couldn't make it, and this man after the retreat said all these monks are enlightened, or went to different levels in 1 day, 2 days. He also came, but I couldn't. Because I was suspecting, I was doubting. Then I started crying because I wasn't getting it. And then he came to me and sat and did something and said, okay, go through these steps, and now you are enlightened suddenly. And then for about 7 days I was believing him. And then I realized, oh, I have these defilements, I have those defilements. How can I be enlightened if I'm having those defilements? So then I disconnected following these people. So I realized, just when someone says these things, you shouldn't believe them. This happens to a lot of people. Monks telling them, don't tell anybody you have come to this level, and then he goes to the teaching hall and says, I'm so excited, this is what the monk said. So he cannot even hold it to himself. Just by you wanting to report that to others means you are not enlightened. Because even if you are enlightened, never, the Buddha says, don't tell that to others. Because there is ego manifestation right there. And then you have to live the rest of your life proving that you are an enlightened person. That's such a trouble for you. So here we've understood the underlying tendency to lust. When one is touched by painful feeling, if one sorrows, grieves and laments, weeps beating one's breast and becomes distraught, then the underlying tendency to aversion lies within one. Clear, right? Aversion comes when you have sorrow, pain and all that. So then the third thing is, when one is touched by neither painful nor unpleasant feeling, see the danger in there. Someone may think adukkama sukha is okay, not having pain or pleasure is okay, but if one is touched by neither painful nor pleasant feeling, if one does not understand as it actually is, the origination, the disappearance, the gratification, the danger and the escape in regard to that feeling. So there is a gratification in there, there is a origination, disappearance, there is the danger. What's the danger in there? The danger is that there is a person identifying neither painful nor pleasant feeling. There is someone there to see that. So that's so what then the underlying tendency to ignorance lies within one. So behind neither painful nor pleasant feeling, the underlying tendency is ignorance. You ignore the truth, or there is not knowing the truth in you. Ignoring is a different way to put it, but you are ignorant of this.
Ignoring, would that be more avoiding?
Avoiding the truth that you are, or you are not taught the right way. When you hear it this way, even with neither painful nor pleasant feeling, you see the underlying tendency to ignorance in it, that you tend to believe a person's existence in there. Because that's why there is an acceptance that this feeling is neither painful nor pleasant feeling. And also it goes with the remaining two feelings. Lust manifest and aversion manifest also because I, the letter I, is accepted by that person. So then right there, the other aspect, when one is touched by when one is touched by let me go. So when one is touched by neither painful nor pleasant feeling, if one does not understand as it actually is. So I just explained that. Big monks, that one shall here and now make an end of suffering without abandoning the underlying tendency to lust for pleasant feeling, without abolishing the underlying tendency to aversion towards painful feeling, without extirpating the underlying tendency to ignorance in regard to neither painful nor pleasant feeling, without abandoning ignorance and arousing true knowledge, this is impossible. This is the Buddha saying. Without removing all these, like lust, aversion and ignorance, if someone says, I can be enlightened, the Buddha says it's impossible for that person to be enlightened. Monks, so he goes on to explain the same phenomena again, to explain the abandonment of the underlying tendencies. What is the abandonment? I'm skipping some lines here. When one is touched by pleasant feeling, if one does not delight in it, does not welcome it, and does not remain holding to it, then the underlying tendency to lust does not lie within one. See? When one is touched by a painful feeling, if one does not sorrow, grieves, and lament, does not weep beating one's breast and becomes distraught, then the underlying tendency to aversion does not lie within one. This is how you test an enlightened person. When one is touched by a neither painful nor pleasant feeling, if one understands as it actually is the origination, the disappearance, the gratification, the danger, and the escape in regard to that feeling, then the underlying tendency to ignorance does not lie within one. Monks, that one shall here now make an end of suffering by abandoning the underlying tendency to lust for pleasant feeling, by abolishing the underlying tendency to aversion towards painful feeling, by extirpating, is that how you say it? Extirpating the underlying tendency, tendency to ignorance in regard to neither painful nor pleasant feeling, by abandoning ignorance and arousing true knowledge, this is possible. So, not having those things is actually the enlightenment. So, the last part. Seeing thus, monks, a well-taught, noble disciple becomes disenchanted with the eye. Disenchanted. You don't enchant, you disenchant. You don't delight in it, you disconnect from it. Dispassionate about it. Disenchanted with forms, disenchanted with eye consciousness, disenchanted with eye contact, disenchanted with feeling, disenchanted with craving. He becomes disenchanted with the ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, mind objects, mind consciousness, mind contact, mind feeling, and craving. When you become disenchanted with all this, being disenchanted, he becomes dispassionate. Through dispassion, his mind is liberated. When it is liberated, there comes the knowledge it is liberated. So it comes to you when you are liberated. The knowledge comes to you. He understands birth is destroyed, the holy life has been lived, what has to be done has been done. There is no more coming to any state of being as a heavenly being or a petha, like a ghost being or any other being. That is what the Blessed One said. The monks were satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. Now while this discourse was being spoken, through not clinging, the minds of 60 monks were liberated from the defilements. So, who is enlightened?
I have a question.
Yeah?
When they attained enlightenment, then what more is there to do living, like supporting the body? Don't you just lie down and...
No, you just eat, sleep, or you just live an ordinary life.
Okay.
You became enlightened to these things, and you are dispassionate. Then you choose a monastic life.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you don't find any meaning in pursuing worldly pleasures. And when you do not pursue worldly pleasures, you are living a holy life, pure, and such life is so praised, very much praised, that people will give anything to you because you are such a pure person that you are not lusting after anything in the world.
Yeah. And then all those things that they're offering, you don't care about it.
Yeah. You don't care about it.
And then you don't need anything either, right?
You don't need anything
Yeah.
because you choose a certain way of life. Because, like, an iPhone is offered, like you're like, why are you giving this to me? You have that in your face because you don't find any use of it.
Okay.
Connect with whom? Facebook? What's the point? Like, so all this social media won't exist in a world of enlightened beings.
It's so easy, or not easy. I mean, it's, I can't find a different word to use it. You know, the wish to be, you know, it's the aversion, and to like be, to let go of that and to not have the aversion. It's just like, that sounds like, oh, that would be nice.
Yeah.
But the other side, and craving is different. I mean, that when I think of craving, it's that really holding tight to things.
Yeah.
But does it also mean like seeing the beauty in a sunset? I mean,
No.
and just, you know, being filled with that.
But then it
wow.
goes with neither painful nor pleasant feeling, or maybe delighting in such a neutral thing like breath.
Mhm.
And they are equal in some ways. This reminds me of a story of this monk who used to walk alone. Walk with just one student every day, but the rule is the student is not supposed to talk. But one day, a new student joined, and he happened to see the sunset. And he happened to say, "Wow, what a beautiful sunset." As soon as he said that, the teacher stopped the walk and went back to the monastery and said, "This student is never allowed to walk with me again." And other students said, "You know, he's just a new student, just forgive him. He just didn't know the rule. He just broke it once, and he will never break it again." And then the teacher said, the moment when my student said, "What a beautiful sunset," he was not watching the beauty of the sunset. He was watching the beauty of words. When you get into words, you ruin the beauty of it. You just can stare at it and not have words and enjoy the sunset. So I think your sunset watching will be different from now on. Anyway, so to answer your question, there are things like sunset, moon, trees. That's why monks, like renunciants, enjoy nature and go stay away as much as possible from society and people, and you come back for basic needs like food, but then you are not even looking around. Just look just about few feet ahead of you, and when you have enough food, no matter what you offered, you just get that and go back. So we derive from that culture, although that's very hard in a country like this.
I think the problem is not enjoying the sunset, but you're craving it, isn't it?
Yes. It's hard for you to arouse craving with sunset, but when you see sunset, you may think about people that you want to have there with you to enjoy that sunset. So there's an immediate danger in enjoying a sunset and having lust in you.
And if you're going the following day looking the same thing, then you're craving it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, if you are lusting after sunsets and sunsets, like an artist maybe, that's all you want to see. Or a filmmaker just wants to capture the best time to get that scene. Like Matthew Ricards, he was in these high mountains in Tibet, in Mongolia. There's just 3 seconds. He's a great photographer. He did an exhibition in San Diego in a conference I was in, and he said, "No one has ever captured this one but me. You have to be right in this spot and right at this moment to capture this very view, and it only lasts for 3 seconds," he said. So that's how value comes to these. But then he's the happiest monk, happiest person in the world, right? They say. So he must be a special way of looking at sunsets. When you are enlightened, you have, I think, a different world view. So, for you to know what that worldview is, you have to be enlightened. So people always question like, what ways an arahant lives? Like, does he have feelings? Does he have this? Does he have what? Where has his cycle ended? In the cycle of dependent origination, like from contacts, does he not have feelings, or does he have feelings and not identify with those? Like he tastes the food, but he's not lusting after. So there must be so much clarity in his mind to not fall into craving when he eats. So that's why arahants or enlightened beings are called ever mindful beings. They always have mindfulness. They know what arises and passes away. Before you lust after things cease. Like you hit against something and it falls. There's no more continuation. Or at least that's how I can look at it. Anyway, any more questions before we finish?
Oh, one question.
Okay.
What about things like cold and hot? Would they feel those feelings?
Certainly they do. Like the Buddha himself had a back pain, he felt that. And then he stopped giving his teachings and he asked someone else to give the teaching, and he went and he was there, but he didn't want to stay in the sitting posture. He lied down. And so monks are, taught in what's that sutra? Sabbasava and Vitakka Santan, like sutras. Monks, the different defilements are eradicated when you tolerate cold and heat. So there are certain defilements that come with, like you want to build a house because it's cold. So there are stories of monks going to remote jungles to meditate and then sending a letter to the teacher asking for things like, what if I just had an attendant? Then I will have a smooth life. And the attendant needs a cow, and the attendant needs to marry, and then you also, in no time you find a whole village living around you. Then you get busy again. So these defilements can be easily abandoned when you can tolerate cold, heat, bad things. So the monks are taught to reflect wisely, always saying that these robes have a purpose. This alms food has a purpose, and only for those purposes you are taking alms food or wearing robes or taking medicinal drinks. So these are reflections that monks should reflect on all the time, so you can avoid getting into businesses of building, constructing things and all that. This is why during the Buddha's times, people who were able to afford building things built and offered monasteries when it became necessary, when so many monks joined the Buddha's order. Until that point, even after these were offered, whenever the Buddha felt like abandoning the monastery, he would go and sit under a tree. And he will not be the abbot of any of these places. I hope Bhante Sankicha doesn't listen to this. When you become the abbot, you see errors and things. When you become the visitor, you don't see errors very much because you just use the place and leave. Even in your house, when you are the owner, you want to fix things. Visitors come, they say, oh yeah, this is such a beautiful place. You maintain it nicely. You haven't seen it, but they do.
That is how I missed the meditation.
But did you have visitors?
No, I had some fixing
Things,
things.
right? You are the owner of the house, right? Alright, so anyway, let's end the discussion there, and let's discuss Majjhima Nikaya 43 next time. It will be an interesting discussion. We usually end with this gatha, this on page 6. You have the books over here. We will do Pali and English. You know this in Pali. Sabba papassa akaranam kusalassa upasampada sacitta pariyodapanam edam buddhana sasanam. The avoiding of evil, the doing of good, the purification of the mind, this is the Buddha's teaching. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you for coming. Such a delightful conversation because you were here.
It would be quiet if we were not here.
I'll be speaking to walls.